My name is Patricia Jones. I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I have been what people call accommodating. Some might say too accommodating. But I prefer to think I simply understood the value of peace, of harmony, of keeping the family boat from rocking too violently in troubled waters. This house, this beautiful, solid Victorian home with its wraparound porch and century-old oak trees, has been my rock for 43 years. Arthur and I bought it when Derek was just 5 years old. We poured everything into it. Not just money, though Lord knows we sacrificed plenty of that. We poured our dreams into every room, our laughter into every corner, our tears into the foundation when times got hard. After Arthur passed 5 years ago, this house became more than a home. It became my sanctuary, my legacy, the physical manifestation of everything we built together, everything we survived, everything we loved. So when my son Derek called me 3 months ago, his voice thick with shame and desperation, telling me he'd lost his construction job and asking if he, his wife Lillian, and their 2 children could stay with me, just temporarily. What was I supposed to say? What mother turns away her struggling son? I said yes. Of course, I said yes. I thought I was extending love and a safe harbor. But within 48 hours, I realized I was a house guest watching my legacy get dismantled, piece by painful piece. The change happened so fast it left me breathless. One moment, I was greeting them at the door with open arms and a home-cooked meal. The next, I was watching Lillian walk through my home like a general surveying conquered territory. "This wallpaper is outdated," she announced within the first hour, running her manicured nail along the cream damask pattern I'd chosen with Arthur. "Very outdated." "It's classic," I said softly. "Arthur and we'll need to modernize everything." She didn't even let me finish. "David, Sophie, go pick your rooms." My rooms. The guest rooms I'd carefully maintained. But I bit my tongue. They were family. This was temporary. Derek stood behind his wife, looking at everything except me. My tall, once confident son now seemed to shrink into himself, his shoulders permanently hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. The man who used to fill a room with his presence now took up as little space as possible. "Derek, honey, could you help me bring in?" I started. "He's exhausted, Patricia." Lillian cut me off again, her tone sharp and dismissive. "You can handle the small bags." She called me Patricia. Not Mom. Not even Mrs. Jones. Just Patricia, like I was some distant acquaintance. That first evening, I watched from the kitchen doorway as Lillian moved through my living room, picking up photographs. My wedding portrait. Pictures of Derek as a baby. Arthur's retirement celebration. She examined each one with the critical eye of someone appraising estate sale items, then placed them face down on the side table. "These make the room feel cluttered," she said to no one in particular. "Very cluttered." My heart clenched. Those weren't clutter. Those were memories. They were evidence of a life well lived, of love that survived decades. The next morning was worse. Much worse. I came downstairs to find Lillian boxing up my mother's china, the delicate rose-patterned set that had survived 3 generations of Jones women. "What are you doing?" I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. "Creating storage space." She didn't even look up. "This house is a fixer-upper, Patricia. It needs serious modernization. We can't work around all this antiquated stuff." Antiquated stuff. My heritage. My history. My heart on shelves. "Those belong to my mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And her mother before that. Well, they're not really functional for a modern family." Lillian sealed the box with aggressive strips of packing tape. "We'll put them somewhere safe. Somewhere out of the way." Derek walked through at that moment. He saw the box. He saw my face. For one brief second, I thought he might say something, might stand up for me, might remember whose house this was. Instead, he looked away and kept walking. That silence, that cowardly, complicit silence, hurt more than anything Lillian had done. By day 2, my heirlooms were in the basement. My furniture was being rearranged for better flow. My routines were disrupted. My space was shrinking. and my son said nothing. Absolutely nothing. I stood in my bedroom that second night, looking at the framed deed on my wall, the one Arthur and I had hung there 30 years ago as a reminder of what we'd accomplished. The house suddenly felt different. Heavier somehow. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing at a crossroads. One path led to continued accommodation, to peace at any price, to becoming invisible in my own home. The other path? Well, that path was about to reveal itself at tomorrow night's dinner. And once I stepped onto it, there would be absolutely no turning back. I spent all of day 3 in the kitchen. My kitchen. The heart of my home where I'd fed my family for 4 decades, where Arthur and I had shared coffee every morning, where Derek had done his homework at the counter while I cooked dinner. I was preparing a special meal. A welcome dinner, I told myself. Roasted chicken with herbs from my garden. Garlic mashed potatoes made from Arthur's mother's recipe. Green beans almondine. Fresh baked rolls. Apple pie cooling on the windowsill. I was extending an olive branch wrapped in comfort food. Looking back now, I see how pathetic that was. How desperately I was clinging to some fantasy where good cooking could smooth over the invasion of my space, my history, my very existence. But I didn't know yet. I still believed that kindness would win. That family meant something. That blood mattered more than cruelty. The dining room table, my grandmother's mahogany table that had hosted 40 years of Thanksgiving dinners, birthday celebrations, and quiet Sunday meals, had been rearranged. The chairs were in different positions. My good tablecloth was gone, replaced with some modern runner Lillian must have brought. The head of the table, where Arthur always sat, where I'd sat every meal since his death, now had a different chair. Lillian's chair. I could tell because she'd already placed her phone and a glass of wine there. Claiming territory. Marking her space. I set the food out carefully, each dish placed with the precision of someone trying to create perfection. Maybe if everything was perfect, maybe if I tried hard enough, maybe then, dinner's ready, I called out softly. They came down like a small army. David and Sophie ran ahead, excited by the smell of food. Derek followed slowly, still not meeting my eyes. And Lillian swept in last, already surveying the table with that critical expression I'd come to recognize. I moved toward my usual seat, the one to the right of the head, where I'd sat next to Arthur for decades. That's David's seat now, Lillian said smoothly, gesturing for her son to sit there. You can take the end, Patricia. The end. The furthest seat from the head. The spot usually reserved for young children or distant relatives at holiday dinners. I relocated without argument. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Be accommodating. The children served themselves eagerly. Derek took small portions, moving mechanically. Lillian examined each dish like a food critic preparing to write a scathing review. I reached for the serving spoon for the mashed potatoes, my hand moving across the table toward the bowl I'd carefully prepared. Stop, Patricia. Lillian's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried a weight that froze my hand mid-reach, the spoon suspended above the table like a conductor's baton stuck in time. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her eyes were cold, calculating. This wasn't impulse. This was planned. Deliberate. I'm the hostess here now. She said it with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. This is my table. My family's table. The room went silent. Even the children stopped chewing. David looked confused. Sophie's eyes were wide. Derek stared at his plate. Just stared. Like if he looked hard enough, he could disappear into the china. The dogs haven't been fed, Lillian continued, her voice perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. Our pups need feeding. And frankly, I need the space here. She picked up my plate, my grandmother's china that I'd set for myself, and held it out to me like she was handing trash to a servant. Take this plate and your spoon and go eat outside with the dogs. She paused, letting each word land like a stone dropping into still water. That's where you belong now. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute. It transcended pain. It moved past hurt into something else entirely. Something surgical. Something that burned and sealed at the same time. I didn't cry. I wanted to. but the tears wouldn't come. They were locked behind something harder, colder. I didn't shout. What would shouting do? Give her the satisfaction of seeing me break? Let her paint me as the hysterical old woman? No response. Instead, I stood slowly, very slowly. I took the plate from her hand with steady fingers that surprised even me. I set down the serving spoon I'd been reaching for, and I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, the baby I'd nursed through colic, the teenager I'd defended to teachers, the man whose wedding I'd paid for. He kept his eyes down, completely down. That silence, that cowardly, complicit, gutless silence, landed harder than any insult Lillian could throw. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. He was choosing to pretend I didn't exist rather than defend me. Derek, I said quietly. Just his name. Just once. He flinched, but he didn't look up. He didn't speak. He didn't move. In that second, something fundamental died inside me. The old Patricia Jones, the accommodating, peacekeeping, boundary-less mother, was gone. Cauterized. Burned away by humiliation, so profound it transformed into something else entirely. Strategic coldness. Absolute clarity. A certainty that cut like a scalpel. I didn't belong with the dogs. But I suddenly understood with perfect clarity who did. Of course, I said softly, my voice unnaturally calm. Of course. I walked out of the dining room with my plate, past the kitchen, past the back door. But I didn't go outside. Not quite. I went in my office. My private office that I kept locked. The one room they hadn't invaded yet. I set the plate down on my desk without looking at it. I pulled out my filing cabinet key from the chain around my neck, the one I'd worn every day since Arthur's death. And I retrieved a phone. Not my regular phone. A secondary phone. A burner phone I'd kept charged and ready for 5 years. For exactly this moment. I dialed a number I'd memorized long ago. It rang twice. Grace. My voice was steel wrapped in silk. It's time now. They crossed the line. Initiate protocol legacy immediately. I hung up. I looked at the framed deed on my wall. The deed that told only half the story. Lillian thought she'd won. Derek thought his silence would preserve his marriage. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. And when it arrived tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, it would arrive with legal documents and a notary seal. I smiled for the first time in 3 days. Tomorrow, they would learn that the most powerful revenge is always served cold. On official letterhead. I stood in my office with the burner phone still warm in my hand, staring at the framed deed on the wall. The same deed I'd looked at 1,000 times since Arthur's death. The same deed that told only half the story, the public half, the half everyone assumed they understood. They thought they saw property. Simple property. For walls and a roof. An asset to leverage. A place to occupy. Something to modernize and claim. I saw a weapon. A perfectly legal, carefully constructed, ironclad weapon that I'd spent 5 years sharpening in complete silence. And I was about to teach them that the most powerful revenge is always served on a legal document. Notarized. Certified. Absolutely irreversible. The conversation with Grace had been brief. It needed to be. We prepared for this moment years ago, back when Arthur's body was barely cold and the vultures started circling. Back when distant relatives suddenly remembered my existence and Derek's cousins started asking pointed questions about estate planning. Grace understood immediately. No questions asked. No hesitation. Just cold, professional efficiency. 9 o'clock sharp, she confirmed. I'll bring everything. The full portfolio. Certified copies. The notary. Everything documented. No negotiation, I'd added. Never negotiation, she'd replied. Only presentation of facts. I'd hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 days. Not quite peace. Not quite satisfaction. Something sharper. Something that tasted like control restored. Like dignity reclaimed. I could hear them through the door. Lillian's voice carrying from the dining room, high and animated now that the unpleasant old woman had been banished. The scraping of chairs. Sophie asking where Grandma went. Lillian's dismissive response that I was probably fine. Probably fine. As if humiliating a woman in her own home was something you could just move past. As if exile to eat with animals was a minor social faux pas. I looked around my office, the one room I'd kept locked since they arrived. My sanctuary. Arthur's desk. My filing cabinets. The safe hidden behind the bookshelf that only I knew the combination to. This room held everything that mattered. Not just documents. Not just legal papers. But the architecture of my survival. The blueprint of my protection. The fortress I'd built in grief, while everyone assumed I was just a sad widow going through the motions. I pulled out the main file. The thick one. The one labeled simply Jones Family Endowment, in Grace's precise handwriting. 5 years of planning. 5 years of protecting myself while appearing vulnerable. 5 years of smiling and accommodating while building walls they couldn't see. Arthur and I had always been strategic. People mistook our kindness for weakness, our generosity for foolishness. But we'd survived the Depression-era parents. We'd built a business from nothing. We'd weathered recessions and family betrayals and the thousand small cruelties that life throws at people who dare to build something. Arthur had taught me one crucial lesson in our 43 years together. Patricia, the people who smile and accommodate aren't weak. They're strategic. But the moment someone mistakes your kindness for weakness, you show them the steel underneath. I'd shown nothing but kindness for 3 days. Pure kindness. Extended hospitality. Swallowed disrespect. Tolerated invasion. Now it was time for the steel. I sat down at Arthur's desk, my desk now, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the digital copies of everything Grace would bring tomorrow. I wanted to review it one final time. Make sure I remembered every detail, every clause, every protection. The Jones Family Endowment, established 5 years ago, 6 months after Arthur's death. An irrevocable trust designed specifically to protect the house, the property, the legacy from exactly this kind of situation. The house wasn't mine anymore. Not technically. Not legally. It belonged to the endowment. I had donated it, legally transferred full ownership, to a charitable trust with one specific mission, preserving the Jones family legacy and providing housing security for the founder. And I was the founder, the sole trustee, the only person with authority to make decisions about the property. For life. Irrevocably. Permanently. The genius of it, and Grace had been brilliant in the construction, was that it made the house untouchable. Not subject to probate. Not vulnerable to creditors. Not accessible to greedy relatives or entitled daughters-in-law or even my own son. I had lifetime tenancy. Complete control. Absolute authority. Anyone else? They were guests. They existed on the property at my discretion. At the endowment's discretion. Which meant at my discretion. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Derek's heavy tread. He paused outside my office door. I could see his shadow under the door, his feet shifting nervously. He didn't knock. Of course not. That would require courage he clearly no longer possessed. After 30 seconds, he walked away. Back to his wife. Back to his complicit silence. I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I'd expected to feel anger or hurt or even residual love. Instead, there was just cold calculation. Mathematical precision. The emotional distance of a surgeon preparing for a necessary amputation. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Grace would arrive with documents. Official documents. Legal documents. Documents that would transform this situation from family drama into legal reality. Tomorrow morning, Lillian would learn that the hostess seat she'd claimed wasn't hers to take. Tomorrow morning, Derek would learn that his silence had cost him far more than he understood. Tomorrow morning, they would all learn that Patricia Jones, accommodating, kind, doormat Patricia Jones, had been playing a completely different game all along. I pulled out my regular phone and set 3 alarms for tomorrow. 6 o'clock. 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock. I wanted to be fully awake. Fully dressed. Fully prepared. I wanted to watch their faces when Grace walked through that door. I wanted to see the exact moment they realized their mistake. I closed the file folder and locked it back in the cabinet. I turned off the lights in my office. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I stood in the darkness, listening to my house, to the sounds of my family upstairs, to the murmur of television from the living room, to Lillian's voice giving orders about tomorrow's plans. Their plans. Their assumptions. Their absolute certainty that they'd won. Let them have tonight. Let them sleep easy. Let Lillian dream of modernizations and Derek hide in his cowardice. Tomorrow, the real Patricia Jones would introduce herself. And she would be absolutely unrecognizable. That night, lying in my bed, the bed Arthur and I had shared for 40 years, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety. Not from fear. From anticipation. So I let my mind drift back to where this all began. Back to the moment I realized I needed protection. Back to 5 years ago, when Arthur's funeral reception was barely over and the predators showed their teeth. Arthur died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. Sudden. Devastating. One moment he was pruning the rose bushes, the next he was gone. 43 years of marriage ended in an ambulance ride I'll never forget. The funeral was on Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, they descended. I'd been a widow for less than a week. I was still wearing black. Still crying at random moments. Still reaching for him in my sleep and waking to cold, empty sheets. Arthur's nephew Marcus arrived first. I hadn't seen Marcus in 15 years. Not since he'd borrowed $5,000 from us and never repaid it. But suddenly he was on my doorstep with a casserole and concern that felt rehearsed. Aunt Patricia, we need to talk about the house, he'd said before even sitting down. It's too much for you now. Too much maintenance. Too much responsibility. I'd stared at him. Arthur's body was barely cold. You should sell it, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Downsize. Get something manageable. I know a real estate agent who could help. We could list it next week. Next week. Arthur would have been dead for 14 days. My sister Janet came 2 days later. Janet, who'd always been jealous of this house, of my marriage, of everything I'd built with Arthur. She brought her financial advisor husband, Richard. Patricia, darling, we're worried about you. Janet cooed, sitting in my living room like she owned it. This big house all alone. What if you fall? What if something happens? Richard pulled out a folder. An actual folder. Pre-prepared. We've been looking at some lovely assisted living facilities, he said smoothly. Very reasonable rates. You could sell this property, invest the proceeds, and live comfortably. Very comfortably. They had brochures. Glossy brochures. They'd planned this before knocking on my door. Derek's cousins called. Arthur's former business partners stopped by. Even neighbors I barely knew suddenly had opinions about my future, my finances, my ability to manage my own life. Every single one of them saw the same thing. Vulnerable widow. Valuable property. Opportunity. They saw grief. I saw predators. That was when I called Grace. Grace Patterson, the attorney who'd handled Arthur's business for 20 years. The one person I trusted completely. Grace, I need protection. I told her. I need a fortress. Something nobody can touch. Not my family. Not creditors. Not anyone. Grace didn't patronize me. Didn't tell me I was overreacting. Didn't suggest I was being paranoid in my grief. Instead, she said, let me build you something absolutely ironclad. We met in her office 3 times over the next month. Each meeting, Grace explained another layer of protection. Another wall. Another legal barrier. A simple will isn't enough, she'd explained during our first meeting. Wills can be contested. Assets can be claimed. Creditors can come after estates. Family members can file lawsuits. You need something stronger. What's stronger? I'd asked. An irrevocable trust. Grace had smiled then. Actually smiled. Specifically, a charitable endowment. The Jones Family Endowment was born in those meetings. Not just a trust. Not just a legal document. A complete restructuring of ownership. I didn't just write a will leaving the house to someone someday. I donated the house, legally transferred full ownership to a newly created charitable organization, the endowment. The house stopped being my personal property that day. It became an asset of a legal entity, protected, untouchable, shielded from everything. But I still live here, I'd said, confused. I still control it, right? Better than control, Grace had explained. You're the founder and sole trustee. You have lifetime tenancy, guaranteed, irrevocable, permanent. You make all decisions about the property. You determine who can live here. You set all rules. But the house itself? It's protected from creditors, lawsuits, family claims, probate, everything. The genius was multi-layered. The house couldn't be seized for debts. It wasn't mine to seize. It couldn't be claimed by relatives. It belonged to a charitable organization. It couldn't be sold without my consent. I was the sole trustee. Anyone else living there? They were guests, residents, occupants at the discretion of the endowment. At my discretion. What about Derek? I'd asked. What if he needs help someday? Grace had looked at me carefully. Patricia, your kindness is admirable. But kindness without boundaries is how predators win. The endowment allows you to help Derek or anyone on your terms, not theirs. She'd been right. God, she'd been right. The paperwork took 3 months. Legal filings, documentation, transfers, certifications. We kept it absolutely quiet. I told no one. Not Derek. Not Janet. Not a single soul. I established the endowment's mission, preserving the Jones family legacy and providing housing security for the founder. Vague enough to be flexible, specific enough to be legally sound. I signed the final documents on what would have been Arthur's 64th birthday. The house was no longer Patricia Jones's property. It was the primary asset of the Jones family endowment. I filed the deed transfer. I paid the fees. I locked the documents in my safe. And then I never mentioned it to anyone. Marcus kept calling about selling. I smiled and said, maybe someday. Janet kept pushing assisted living. I nodded and said, I'll think about it. They all thought I was just a grieving widow who was too sentimental to be practical, too weak to make hard decisions, too kind to protect herself. They saw a target. They never realized I'd built a fortress. The endowment sat dormant for 5 years. A legal structure waiting, a weapon in reserve, a shield I'd never needed to raise. Until 3 days ago. Until Lillian told me to eat with the dogs. Until Derek chose silence over defending his mother. Until they mistook my kindness for weakness one final time. They saw a grieving mother who was just too kind. They never realized that in my sorrow, I'd built an ironclad fortress, a legal shield I named the legacy. It was dormant, waiting patiently for 5 years. Waiting only for an act of pure, calculated disrespect to bring it to life. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the legacy would wake up. And when it did, Lillian would learn that she wasn't the hostess. She was a guest who just overstayed her welcome. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, Arthur's pillow still tucked against my chest like I'd held it every night since he died. But this time, instead of crying into it, I smiled. Arthur would have been so proud of me. So incredibly proud. Show them the steel, Patricia, I whispered to his memory. Tomorrow, my love. Tomorrow they'll see the steel. I woke at 6 o'clock to the sound of my first alarm. I didn't need it. I'd been awake since 5, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in my mind like a general preparing for battle. By 7 o'clock, I was showered and dressed. Not in my usual comfortable house clothes. Not in the soft, accommodating fabrics of the grandmother they'd been dismissing for 3 days. I wore my navy blue suit. The one I'd worn to Arthur's business meetings when he needed me beside him. The one that meant serious business. I paired it with my mother's pearl earrings and the good shoes I saved for important occasions. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Or perhaps I recognized myself for the first time in years. Patricia Jones, founder and sole trustee. Not just a widow. Not just a mother. Not just someone's pushover. At 8:30, I heard Lillian's voice drifting up from downstairs. She was on the phone. Her tone was aggressive, confident. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. Yes, I need information about home equity lines of credit, she was saying. The property is worth approximately $600,000. I'd like to access at least $200 to start renovations. My renovations. My equity. My house. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. And she was about to learn that in approximately 30 minutes. No, the owner is elderly, Lillian continued, her voice dripping with dismissive confidence. Very elderly. We're handling her financial affairs now. She's not really capable of these decisions anymore. Not capable. Elderly and incapable. I gripped the banister, feeling that cold clarity settle over me again. That surgical precision that had replaced all emotion. At 8:55, I descended the stairs. Lillian was at the dining room table, my grandmother's table, with papers spread out everywhere. Bank statements she had no right to access. Property tax documents she'd obviously gone through my office to find. "Good morning, Patricia," she said without looking up. "We need to discuss some financial planning today. Some necessary decisions." "Indeed we do," I replied calmly. "Very necessary." She looked up then, startled by something in my tone. Her eyes swept over my suit, my posture, my expression. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door with measured steps. Unhurried, deliberate. Behind me, I could hear Lillian standing up, confused. Derek's footsteps on the stairs. He'd been hiding in the guest room. I opened the door to Grace Patterson and a stone-faced notary I didn't recognize. Grace wore her power suit and carried her leather briefcase. Her expression was all business. No warmth. No sympathy. Just cold professional authority. "Good morning, Patricia," Grace said formally. "We're here as scheduled." "Please come in," I replied. There in the dining room, Grace swept past me, with the notary following. I trailed behind them, watching Lillian's face transform from confusion to alarm as two official-looking strangers entered her claimed territory. Derek appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled and scared. Good. He should be scared. Grace set her briefcase on the table, right on top of Lillian's unauthorized financial documents, and opened it with a decisive click. She pulled out a thick folder, several certified documents, and her business card. "Mr. and Mrs. Jones," Grace began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "My name is Grace Patterson, attorney at law. I represent the Jones Family Endowment. This property is not Patricia's personal residence." Lillian's mouth opened. "What?" "Of course it's. This property is the core asset of the Jones Family Endowment," Grace continued, not allowing interruption. "A legally established, irrevocable charitable trust created 5 years ago. You are currently living on endowment property without proper authorization." The silence was deafening. Absolute silence. Grace turned to Derek and held out a certified document. "This is the recorded deed transfer, filed with the county 5 years ago. The property ownership was legally transferred to the endowment. Patricia Jones is the founder and sole trustee with lifetime tenancy and complete administrative authority." Derek took the document with shaking hands. His face went ashen as he read it. Actually read it. His eyes scanning the legal language, the official seals, the notarized signatures. "Mom," his voice cracked. Just cracked. I said nothing. Just watched. Lillian snatched the document from his hands. Her eyes flew across the page, growing wider with each line. Her confident mask shattered completely. "This is fraud." She screamed it. Actually screamed. "This is elder abuse. This is illegal manipulation. She can't just—" "Mrs. Jones," Grace interrupted, her voice ice cold. "I assure you, every document I'm presenting was created with Mrs. Patricia Jones's full consent, sound mind, and clear understanding. We have medical evaluations confirming her complete competency. We have witness statements. We have video recordings of the signing. This is absolutely, irrevocably legal." The notary stepped forward, placing additional certified copies on the table. The sound of paper hitting wood was like gunshots in the silent room. You had no right. Lillian's face was purple now. She's a senile old woman who doesn't understand. I understood perfectly, I said quietly. My first words since they'd arrived. I understood 5 years ago when vultures circled after Arthur died. I understood 3 days ago when you started dismantling my home. I understood last night when you told me to eat with the dogs. Derek looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw it. The raw realization spreading across his face like spilled ink. His mother hadn't trusted him. His mother had built legal walls against him. Against her own son. Because he'd earned it. Through weakness. Through complicity. Through silence. Mom, he started. The endowment has specific protocols for residents, Grace continued, pulling out more documents. All residents on endowment property must be authorized by the trustee. Currently, none of you are authorized residents. Lillian's accusations kept coming. Fraud. Manipulation. Coercion. Elder abuse. Every desperate word people scream when they realize they've lost. But her words were meaningless noise. Legal noise. Impotent fury. I wasn't listening to her. I was watching my son's face. Watching the moment he understood that his failure, his pathetic, cowardly failure to defend me, had forced me to build walls against my own family. That was my moment of both victory and profound sorrow. Victory, because I'd protected myself. Because I'd been smart enough to build a fortress, while everyone assumed I was just a grieving widow. Sorrow, because I'd had to. Because my own son had made me do it. What happens now? Derek whispered, still staring at the documents. Still comprehending his new reality. Grace looked at me, waiting for my instructions. Because I was in charge. I'd always been in charge. They'd just been too blind to see it. I took a breath. A long breath. The next words would determine everything. Now, I said quietly, we discuss terms. I stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not theatrically. But with the quiet authority of someone who finally understood their own power. Grace moved aside, giving me the floor. This was my moment. My house. My rules. My terms. Lillian was still sputtering, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. Derek stood frozen, the certified deed hanging limply from his hand like a surrender flag. The children had appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension, their young faces confused and frightened. I looked at each of them, really looked, taking in the scene I'd orchestrated, the reckoning I'd carefully constructed. The Jones family endowment, I began, my voice steady and clear, has the legal authority to remove unauthorized residents within 24 hours. Grace has eviction paperwork already prepared. One signature from me, and you'll be escorted off this property by tomorrow afternoon. Lillian's mouth opened to protest, but Grace held up one hand, silencing her with nothing but a gesture. However, I continued, I am not a cruel woman. Despite what you may think, despite how you've treated me, I am offering mercy. I walked to the dining room table, my grandmother's table that Lillian had claimed, and placed both hands on its polished surface. The same surface where I'd served 40 years of family meals. Where I'd comforted a crying toddler Derek after his first day of school. Where Arthur and I had planned our future. You have 3 choices, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. 3 options. Choose carefully, because I will only offer them once. Derek finally moved, setting down the deed with trembling hands. Mom, please. Choice 1, I interrupted, not harshly but firmly. Sign a formal lease agreement. Fair market rate. Grace has already calculated it at $1,800 monthly. Payable to the Jones family endowment. Standard tenant rights and responsibilities. Security deposit required. First and last month due immediately. $1,800. For a family already drowning financially because Derek lost his job. I watched that reality settle over them like ash. Choice 2, I continued. Vacate the property within 30 days. The endowment will not pursue any claims against you. You leave peacefully. I provide positive references for your next housing situation. Clean break. No animosity. No legal consequences. 30 days to find housing, with no income and 2 children. I saw Lillian calculating, her financial confidence from this morning's phone call crumbling into dust. Or choice 3. I paused, letting the silence build. Letting them lean forward despite themselves. Remain here, rent-free. No lease. No payments. Hope flickered across Derek's face. Lillian's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Under one single, absolutely non-negotiable term. I let each word land separately, deliberately. Unwavering respect for the founder and sole trustee of this endowment. Unwavering respect for me. The room held its breath. What does that mean? Lillian asked, her voice tight and controlled now. The screaming was over. She was negotiating. Good. It means, I said, walking slowly around the table, that I am not a house guest in my own home. I am not someone you banish to eat with animals. I am not someone whose heirlooms you pack away. I am not someone whose history you erase. I stopped directly in front of Lillian, meeting her eyes with unflinching steel. It means you treat me with the respect owed to the woman who is housing you, feeding you, protecting you. It means when I enter a room, you acknowledge me. When I speak, you listen. When I sit at this table, you remember whose table it actually is. That's humiliating, Lillian whispered. Is it? I asked softly. More humiliating than being told to eat with dogs? More humiliating than watching your family heirlooms called antiquated stuff? More humiliating than being called senile and incapable in your own home? She had nothing to say to that. Absolutely nothing. I turned to address everyone. The next insult, spoken or implied, means immediate, final eviction. No warning. No second chance. Grace will be notified. You'll have 24 hours to vacate. Those are the terms. How do we know you won't just invent an insult? Lillian demanded. Use this to manipulate us? Grace stepped forward. I've advised Mrs. Jones to keep a journal. Any incidents will be documented. If eviction becomes necessary, there will be clear evidence. This protects both parties. But who decides what's disrespectful? Lillian pressed. I do, I said simply. The sole trustee decides. That's how trusts work, Lillian. That's how authority works. You live under my roof, under the endowment's roof. You live by my rules. I wasn't asking for my old life back. That life was gone. The accommodating Patricia, who swallowed disrespect for peace, was dead and buried. I was demanding my seat at the table. The head seat. The seat Arthur held for 40 years, and I'd held for 5 since his death. The seat Lillian had stolen 3 days ago. It was the price of admission to the future. And I was the one holding the velvet rope. This is insane, Lillian said, but her voice had lost its fire. She was calculating again. Weighing options. Running financial math. Mom. Derek finally spoke, his voice raw with emotion. I'm so sorry. I should have. You should have defended me, I said quietly. You should have stopped her. You should have remembered who raised you. But you didn't. The words hung between us like a chasm. These are the consequences of your choices, Derek. Both of you. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. When you assume the vulnerable won't protect themselves. Grace began packing her briefcase, her movements crisp and efficient. You have until 5 o'clock this evening to decide. Call my office with your choice. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume you're choosing option 2, voluntary departure in 30 days. The notary, who'd been silent this entire time, stepped forward with one final document. This confirms that the information presented today has been received and understood. Please sign. Derek signed mechanically. Lillian signed with visible fury, her pen nearly tearing the paper. Grace and the notary prepared to leave. At the door, Grace turned back to me. Patricia, remember what we discussed. Document everything. You have my number. Thank you, Grace. I walked them to the door. For everything. When they left, the house fell into suffocating silence. Just me, Derek, Lillian, and 2 frightened children who didn't understand why Grandma was suddenly terrifying. I need air, Lillian finally said. I need to think. She walked out the back door. I heard her pacing on the porch, probably calling her sister, probably screaming about injustice. Derek stood in the dining room, staring at nothing. His shoulders shook. He was crying. Actually crying. "Mom," he whispered, "what have I done?" I looked at my son, my only child, and felt something crack in my carefully constructed armor. Not breaking, just cracking, letting a sliver of the old Patricia peek through. "You forgot where you came from," I said softly. "But you can remember, if you choose to." I walked upstairs to my room, leaving him with his choices. All three of them had choices now. And for the first time in 5 years, maybe in my entire life, so did I. I stayed in my room for 2 hours, not hiding, not avoiding, just giving them space to process, to argue, to decide. Through my closed door, I could hear their voices rising and falling. Lillian's sharp and insistent, Derek's low and defeated. The occasional interruption of David asking questions his parents couldn't answer. At 3 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. Soft. Tentative. Not Lillian's aggressive pounding. Not Derek's heavy-handed rap. "Come in," I said. David entered, my 14-year-old grandson, looking older than his years. He'd always been the sensitive one, the observer, the child who noticed everything and said little. "Grandma?" His voice was small. "Are we leaving?" I patted the bed beside me. He sat down, keeping space between us, uncertain of where he stood in this new world order. "That depends on your parents," I said honestly. "On their choices." "Mom's really angry," he said quietly. "She keeps saying you tricked us, that you're being cruel." "Do you think I'm being cruel?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think you got hurt. I saw her face when she told you to when she said that thing at dinner. I saw your face too. Smart boy. Arthur's grandson for sure. What would you do," I asked gently, "if someone treated you that way in your own home?" "I'd want them to leave," he admitted. "But Mom says we have nowhere to go." "Your mother has choices," I replied. "She's choosing to see them as unfair. That's different from having no choices." He nodded slowly, processing. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. At 4:30, the shouting started. Real shouting. Lillian's voice echoing through the house with a fury that made the walls seem to shake. I descended the stairs to find her in the living room, her face streaked with tears of rage, pointing at Derek with shaking fingers. "You are coming with me," she screamed. "We are leaving this psychotic dictatorship. I will not live under her tyranny. I will not grovel for a roof over my head." Derek stood against the wall, looking like a man caught in a hurricane. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. "Lillian, we have no money," he said quietly. "No job. Nowhere to go." "My sister has her beach house in Miami," Lillian shot back. "We'll stay there until you find work. Until we get on our feet. We are not staying here to be humiliated daily." "Your sister's house is a 2-bedroom condo," Derek replied, his voice hollow. "For all 4 of us?" "Then you find something," Lillian shrieked. "You figured out. That's what men do. They provide. They protect. They don't let their wives be degraded by their mothers." She saw me on the stairs then. Her eyes locked onto mine with pure venom. "This is your fault," she spat. "You with your legal tricks and your power plays. You're destroying this family." "I'm protecting myself," I said calmly. "Something I should have done the moment you arrived." "Protecting yourself?" Lillian laughed bitterly. "You're wielding power like a weapon, making us beg, making us perform respect like trained animals." "I'm requiring basic human decency," I replied. "The same decency I extended to you for 3 days while you dismantled my life." "Derek." Lillian turned to her husband, tears streaming now. Real tears. Not manipulative ones. Tears of genuine fury and wounded pride. "Choose. Right now. Me or her. Your wife or your mother." The room fell silent. David and Sophie had appeared in the doorway, frightened. I could see David's eyes pleading with his father. Sophie was crying, clinging to her brother. Derek looked at his wife, then at me, then at his children. then at the floor. For a long moment, nobody breathed. "I am broken," Derek finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Completely broken. I lost my job. I lost my savings. I lost my pride. And I lost my spine when I let you treat my mother like garbage." Lillian's face went white. "I have to stay here," Derek continued, his voice growing stronger. "I have to rebuild my life. My relationship with my mother. My self-respect. I have to teach my son what it means to have integrity." "Are you serious?" Lillian's voice was ice. Pure ice. "I can't follow you anymore," Derek said, finally meeting her eyes. "I've been following you for years. Following your decisions. Following your lead. And it led me here. To humiliating my own mother. To losing everything." "Then you're choosing her," Lillian said flatly. "I'm choosing to stop being a coward," Derek replied. The silence that followed was deafening. Lillian stood there for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Her chest heaving. Her face cycling through emotions, rage, disbelief, betrayal, calculation. Then she moved. Fast and decisive. "Sophie, get your things," she commanded. "Just clothes. Everything else stays." "Mom." Sophie's voice was tiny. "Now, Sophie." Sophie ran upstairs, crying. David started to follow, but Lillian held up her hand. "Not you," she said coldly. "You're 14. Old enough to make choices. You want to stay in this prison? Stay." David looked at his father. Derek nodded slightly. Permission and apology in one small gesture. "I'm staying," David said quietly. Lillian laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. "Of course you are. You always were a mama's boy. Just like your father." She stormed upstairs. I could hear her throwing things into suitcases. Drawers slamming. Doors banging. Sophie's muffled crying. 30 minutes later, she descended with 2 suitcases and Sophie's hand gripped tightly in hers. Sophie's tear-streaked face looked back at David, at her father, at me. "Say goodbye to Grandma," Lillian said coldly. "Bye, Grandma," Sophie whispered. My heart broke for her, for this child caught in adult warfare. "Goodbye, sweetheart," I said softly. "You're always welcome here." Lillian pulled Sophie toward the door. She turned back one last time, her eyes meeting mine. "You've won your house," she said quietly. "I hope it keeps you warm at night when you realize you've destroyed a family." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "I just refused to be destroyed." She left. The door closed behind her. We heard her car start, heard the tires on the gravel driveway, heard the engine fade into the distance. The house fell into absolute silence. Derek collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. David stood frozen in the doorway. And I remained on the stairs, watching my family fracture and realign in real time. She chose pride over provision. She chose arrogance over family. She chose rage over reconciliation. When her car pulled away, I knew the battle for the property was won. Decisively won. But looking at my son, broken and humiliated and finally aware of his failures, I knew the decades of damage needed quiet, painstaking repair. The war was over. The reconstruction was just beginning. And I had no idea if either of us was strong enough to rebuild what had been so thoroughly destroyed. The first week was silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence that filled every room like fog. Derek moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. He'd taken the smallest guest room, not the master suite Lillian had claimed, and kept the door closed most of the time. I could hear him on the phone at odd hours, his voice low and desperate, searching for work. David tried to fill the quiet with normalcy. He'd make breakfast, awkwardly setting 3 places at the table. He'd ask about homework or chores, trying to create structure in the chaos. But even he couldn't bridge the chasm between his father and me. I gave them space. I'd won the battle. Now I needed to decide if I wanted to win the war or build a peace. On day 8, Derek appeared at breakfast already dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt. His hair was combed. His face was shaved. He looked almost human again. "I have interviews today," he said quietly. 3 of them. Construction firms. They're all hiring. That's good, I replied, pouring coffee. Very good. David, you'll need to take the bus after school, Derek continued. I'll be gone most of the day. No problem, Dad. David looked relieved to hear his father planning, functioning, coming back to life. Derek got the job. The third interview, a mid-sized construction company that needed an experienced foreman. Not glamorous. Not what he'd had before, but honest work with steady pay. He started the following Monday. Left at 6 in the morning, came home at 7 in the evening, covered in dust and exhausted. But there was something different in his eyes. Something I hadn't seen in years. Purpose. Dignity. Self-respect earned through honest labor. David and I fell into our own rhythm during those quiet weeks. He'd come home from school, do his homework at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner. He started asking questions about the house, about Arthur, about the family history Lillian had tried to erase. Grandma, what's this endowment thing really about? He asked one afternoon, looking up from his math homework. I explained it to him. Simply at first, then in more detail as his questions got sharper, more insightful. He had Arthur's mind for systems, for understanding how things worked. So, you protected yourself, he said finally, because you were scared people would take advantage. Exactly that, I confirmed. That's really smart, he said quietly. I wish my mom had understood that. Your mother saw it as rejection. I replied carefully. She wasn't completely wrong. I did build walls. But walls aren't always meant to keep people out. Sometimes they're meant to keep yourself safe. He thought about that for a long time. Then he asked, can I help? With the endowment stuff? Like paperwork or whatever? That's how David became my assistant. He'd help me organize files, update the property records, track maintenance expenses. He learned about trust management, about fiduciary responsibility, about the legal structures that protect vulnerable people. He was learning what his father had forgotten, that power wielded responsibly is different from power wielded selfishly. 6 weeks after Lillian left, Derek knocked on my bedroom door at 9 in the evening. I was reading. I almost told him to come back tomorrow, but something in the knock, hesitant, humble, made me put down my book. Come in, I said. He entered but didn't sit. Just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor. The same posture he'd had as a boy when he'd done something wrong and knew he had to confess. I need to say something, he started, his voice rough. I've been trying to find the words for weeks, but there aren't good words for this. I waited, just waited. What she said to you at that dinner. He stopped, his throat working. When she told you to eat with the dogs. I should have stopped her. Immediately. I should have stood up. I should have defended you. Yes, I said simply. You should have. I was so ashamed, he continued, the words spilling out now, of losing my job, of needing to ask you for help, of failing as a provider. And Lillian was so angry all the time, and I thought if I just kept quiet, if I just let her have her way, maybe the anger would stop. It never stops, I said quietly. Not with appeasement. You taught me that, ironically. Watching you, I realized I'd been doing the same thing my whole life. Staying quiet. Keeping peace. Until there was no peace left to keep. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red. He'd been crying before he knocked. I failed you as a son, he said. Not just that night. For years. I let her disrespect you. I let her erase Dad's memory. I chose the easy path instead of the right one. You did, I agreed. No sugarcoating. No easy comfort. Just truth. I'm so sorry, Mom. His voice cracked. Completely cracked. I'm so incredibly sorry. You deserved better. You deserved a son who protected you the way you always protected me. I stood up then, walked over to him, looked up at my tall son who suddenly seemed small and broken and young. I created the endowment because I was terrified, I said softly. After your father died, people swarmed. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had opinions about what I should do, where I should live, how I should handle my life. And I realized I was utterly alone. Completely vulnerable. His face twisted with pain. I built those walls because I had to, I continued. because I learned that kindness without boundaries is just another word for self-destruction. But Derek. I reached up and put my hand on his cheek, the way I'd done when he was small. I never wanted to use those walls against you. You forced my hand. Your silence forced my hand. I know, he whispered. I'm so sorry. We stood there for a long moment. Then he wrapped his arms around me and cried. Actually cried. Deep, wrenching sobs of a man who'd finally understood what he'd lost and what he'd almost destroyed. I held him, my broken son, and I cried too. For the years of accommodation. For the pain we'd caused each other. For the family that had fractured and just might heal. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. Miami postmark. Lillian's handwriting. I opened it carefully, expecting venom or illegal threats. Instead, there was a single page. Typed. Brief. Formal but not hostile. Patricia, I've spent 6 weeks at my sister's beach house trying to process everything that happened. I was angry. I'm still angry, if I'm honest. But my sister convinced me to see a therapist. I'm learning that my stress over Derek's job loss, over our financial situation, over my loss of control made me cruel. I took my fear out on you. I saw your home as a solution to our problems and you as an obstacle. That was wrong. Deeply wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just acknowledging what I did. I'm staying in Miami for now, working on myself. Sophie is in a good school here. When I'm ready, if you're willing, I'd like to visit. Not to live, just to visit. To try to be civil. Derek can call me when he's ready to talk about Sophie's custody arrangements. Lillian. I read it twice. Then I showed it to Derek. He read it silently, his jaw working, emotions warring across his face. She's trying, he said finally. That's something. It is something, I agreed. More than I expected. That night, the three of us, Derek, David, and I, had dinner together. Not in the formal dining room with its ghosts of humiliation, but in the breakfast nook, casual and comfortable. We talked about David's school, about Derek's job, about plans to repaint the guest rooms. Small talk. Normal talk. But underneath it, something fundamental had shifted. The legacy protocol had stripped away the financial desperation, the power struggles, the manipulation. It had forced everyone to be honest about what they wanted and what they were willing to give. And it left me with a son I'd raised. Not perfect, deeply flawed, but trying now, really trying. I learned something crucial in those weeks. Healthy boundaries don't alienate the people who matter. They don't destroy relationships. They provide a foundation for true love. Love built on respect, not accommodation. On honesty, not appeasement. The old Patricia would have smoothed everything over. Pretended the hurt never happened. Welcomed everyone back without consequences. But the new Patricia? She held the line. She maintained the boundaries. She demanded dignity. And in doing so, she got her son back. 3 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon in early autumn, I set up dinner in the garden. Not inside. Not at grandmother's mahogany table with its weight of history and ghosts. But outside, under the old oak trees where Arthur and I used to sit on summer evenings. I draped lights in the branches. Set out my mother's china. The rose-patterned set that had been banished to the basement and was now reclaimed. Put candles in mason jars. Made it beautiful. Made it peaceful. Derek and David helped me carry out the food. Roasted chicken. Fresh salad from my garden. Homemade bread. Nothing fancy. Nothing performative. Just good, honest food shared between family who'd earned the right to sit together. We sat down as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I took my seat, not at the end, not in the margins, but in the center. The place of honor. The seat I'd finally learned to claim without apology. David said grace. A simple blessing he'd written himself, thanking God for second chances and grandmothers who teach strength. Derek's eyes grew wet, but he smiled through it. We ate in comfortable conversation. David talked about his grades. He was excelling, finding purpose in learning about business and law. Derek mentioned a promotion opportunity at work, his voice carrying pride he'd lost years ago. I shared plans for the spring garden, for the maintenance the house needed, for the future I was now confident I'd see. Halfway through the meal, Derek set down his fork and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, I talked to Lillian yesterday," he said carefully. "She wants to visit next month. Bring Sophie. Stay at a hotel nearby." I nodded slowly. "How do you feel about that?" "Cautiously hopeful," he admitted. "She's different on the phone. Calmer. More self-aware. The therapy seems to be helping." "And you?" I asked. "Are you different?"
He smiled then.
A real smile. "I think I'm finally becoming who I should have been all along." David raised his glass of lemonade. "To becoming better people." We clinked glasses, crystal inherited from Arthur's mother, pulled from storage, and restored to use. To honor. To visibility. As darkness fell and the fairy lights glowed warmer, I realized this was the moment. The moment to speak the truth I'd learned. Not just to them, but to anyone who might hear the story and recognize themselves in it. I set down my napkin and looked at both of them.
My son.
My grandson. My rebuilt family. When Derek's wife told me to eat with the dogs, I began, my voice steady and clear. She thought she was breaking me. Humiliating me. Putting me in my place. Derek flinched at the memory. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "But she didn't break me," I continued. "She awakened me. She awakened something I'd buried for decades under layers of accommodation and people-pleasing and keeping the peace at any cost." "What did she awaken?" David asked softly. "The founder," I said simply. "The founder of my own legacy. The architect of my own protection. The woman who understood that dignity isn't given by others, it's claimed by yourself." I looked up at the house, the endowment's house, my fortress and my sanctuary. I spent 40 years being kind, being generous, being the peacekeeper. And there's nothing wrong with kindness. But kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Generosity without discernment becomes exploitation. "You taught me that," Derek said quietly. "The hard way." "We taught each other," I corrected. "Your failure taught me that even the people we love most can hurt us if we don't protect ourselves. My response taught you that consequences are real, that respect must be mutual, that love without boundaries is just another form of abuse." The garden fell quiet except for crickets and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. "I'm 68 years old," I continued. "For most of my life, I believed that being a good woman meant being accommodating, meant putting everyone else first, meant swallowing hurt to keep the family together." "And now?" David asked. "Now I understand that being good means being strong, means drawing hard lines when necessary, means understanding that some people will only respect you when you demand it, legally enforce it, and refuse to back down." I stood up, and both Derek and David rose with me, a sign of respect that no longer felt forced but natural, earned through the rebuilding of our relationships. "The Jones family endowment wasn't just about protecting property," I said. "It was about protecting myself, about recognizing my own worth when I was most vulnerable, about refusing to become invisible in my own life." I walked to the edge of the garden, looking back at the house glowing with warm light from within. Every window represented a memory. Every room held a story. Every wall stood as testimony to everything Arthur and I had built. "When you're told you belong with the dogs," I said, turning back to face them, "you have two choices. You can believe it, internalize it, accept that diminishment. Or you can stand up, claim your power, and show them who you really are." "You showed us," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed us all." I finally understood, I continued, that it's never too late. Never too late to draw a hard line. Never too late to demand respect. Never too late to remind everyone, especially yourself, that your dignity is priceless. That your worth is non-negotiable. That your legacy is yours to protect. David came to stand beside me. "You didn't just save the house, Grandma. You saved yourself." And in saving myself, I said softly, "I saved us." this family, this possibility of healing. I looked at Derek, at the son who'd failed me and found his way back through humility and hard work. At David, the grandson who'd chosen to stay and learn what real strength looked like. At the house that stood as testament to survival and strategy. If you're watching this, I said, speaking now to everyone who might hear this story, and you feel dismissed, disrespected, pushed aside in your own life, know this. You have more power than you think. More options than they want you to see. More worth than anyone's insults can diminish. Draw your lines. Build your walls. Protect your dignity. And never, ever apologize for refusing to be treated like you belong with the dogs. I raised my glass one final time. To boundaries. To dignity. To becoming the founder of your own legacy. To Grandma, David said. The strongest person I know. To Mom, Derek added. Who finally taught me what love with boundaries looks like. We drank together under the stars, in the garden of the house that was no longer just a house but a fortress, a legacy, a testament to the power of a woman who finally understood her own worth. The old Patricia was gone. The founder remained, and she was never letting anyone tell her where she belonged ever again. Did you like my story? And what city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Give us a like if you enjoyed this story. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.